Hi, it's Alexander Russo with The Grade. I'm here today to talk with Anna Pogarcic about EdNC. Anna, great to have you on the podcast. Why don't you start out by telling folks who you are and what EdNC is?
Hi, yes. So I'm the director of content for EdNC, which is pretty similar to a managing editor role in some more traditional newsrooms. So I work with all of our different content teams on the daily to kind of organize what we cover, how we're going to publish it and distribute it. And it's a lot of great fun. And then EdNC, for those who don't know, we are a nonprofit news website based in North Carolina. We cover public schools all through the education continuum. So starting in pre-K and childcare, all the way through attainment and post-secondary education.
Excellent. And before we jump in, I always like to ask people a little bit about them personally, or at least on the line between personal and professional. Do you have an education TV show or movie or song that you particularly like that connects you and pop culture and education? My go-to is the season of The Wire, the HBO show that had a season in a school. What's yours, if any?
Well, I think right now it has to be Abbott Elementary. I think that's the only answer. For those who don't know, I think it's on its 3rd season now, and it follows a public school in Philadelphia and all the teachers, and it's kind of a workplace sitcom, and really is obviously very funny and also does a really great job kind of bringing some of the topics around education to the forefront in a very light way.
Everybody loves Abbott Elementary. Um, Tell us a little bit about where Ed and C fits in the ecosystem of education news outlets. There are a lot of education news outlets. There are a lot of nonprofits. For folks who don't know, where does Ed and C sort of fit, or how does it compare?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it has a very special role in North Carolina specifically. We are the only education outlet that solely focuses on North Carolina schools. So we work a lot with local newsrooms across North Carolina, often partnering or augmenting their coverage or doing things like that. And obviously, we pull a lot on kind of some national trends that other outlets cover. But what really makes us special is that we focus on North Carolina and we're the only ones doing it across the state. And that's really what makes EdNC special is that we focus on all 100 counties in North Carolina, urban and rural. North Carolina has 100 different counties with very different, issues and topics that matter to people across all of them. And we work hard to travel to all 100 every single year and really highlight those issues that are happening at the local level, bringing them to a statewide audience.
Who else is out there? If you guys are unique in serving the whole state and getting to all the counties, which is an impressive thing to try to do, who else is out there in North Carolina covering education whose work you complement or compete with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, there's local outlets all across our state. We have public radio, TV, newspapers, and even some other, startup or digital native things like newsletters that are happening across the state. And so we often will partner with them or republish their coverage or they'll republish us. We don't try to necessarily compete head to head with anybody, I would say. But yeah, so there's a fairly robust local news landscape in North Carolina. And then of course there are other statewide outlets as well that maybe don't necessarily specifically cover education, maybe politics or travel or other things like that. So
Right.
there's definitely a lot going on in North Carolina, but we are the main voice for public schools in terms of news coverage.
And how would I map if I'm not from North Carolina, but I know a little bit about education and journalism? How would I? Are you the Alabama Education Lab? Are you the Texas Tribune? Where do you fit, or how would you compare yourself to other outlets that folks may know?
I mean, we're at NC, we're definitely our own thing, I would say. I think what makes us really special is that we try to do a blend of both news as well as policy analysis and really community on the ground work to get our readers and the North Carolina population more broadly involved in talking about these issues. So we're not just sitting in an office writing articles every day. Like I said, we're going out in community at any given point in a week. We have a reporter who's either in a school or in a community college or a child care center trying to really elevate these stories and we're trying to facilitate community conversations that way as well. So not just, writing articles about people, really trying to be by and for people across North Carolina.
Nice. And we'll talk a little bit more about the coverage in a minute. Are there other folks in other states who are doing the Ed and C approach, emulating some or all of what you do in other places?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think we've definitely seen across the journalism industry, especially in the last decade or so, as we've seen the rise of digital media as well as um, all the different things that we have to do as journalists to get people's attention. There definitely is a broader focus, I would say, on that community engagement aspect that we value at EdNC. So we're certainly not the only ones doing it. Even within the education space, I know Chalkbeat, especially, they have a whole community engagement team and things like that. I've spoken to some of the people on their staff, so we're certainly not the only ones doing it, and it's definitely becoming more popular, which is really great to see because, at NC, we believe that that's what makes journalism really special and sustainable in the future. And so I love to see that other outlets are kind of adopting that as well, and simultaneously that we are.
Community engagement, that's the approach you're saying that you're seeing other people go and do?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen within North Carolina and across the country, it seems that news outlets are all kind of, understanding that we need to get out in communities and meet our readers where they are in order to continue to grow and be sustainable. And so it definitely seems that that's becoming at least a popular thing to talk about and try to implement
It's
across newsrooms.
It certainly is a popular thing to talk about. For folks who might not know, or just in the interests of specificity and concreteness, what is community engagement? What does it look like? Why is it so important? I feel like education journalism and journalism in general is full of buzzwords that may or may not mean things outside of conferences. What is community
Yeah.
engagement? What's it look like?
Uh, that's a great question, and definitely looks like a lot of different things. I think if you really wanna boil it down, it is going out and meeting real people, not just covering meetings or places where people in power kind of have command of the room. And so speaking for at least Ed and C, what that looks like is traveling across the state, perhaps visiting specific schools or talking with people on the ground, one, about what they care about, and then two, how to get it to them. And so that could look like hosting a community event, perhaps partnering with a local organization to get people in a one room and talk about the issues that matter to them. It could even look like running targeted Facebook ads, which we do in certain areas to try to, get people's attention there. So it can look like a wide variety of things. It doesn't necessarily have, one exact form that it can take, but it really just gets to how can we directly convene with people who are our readers or could be our readers and make sure that we keep them in our orbit going forward.
So if I'm an outlet and I do a monthly office hours at
Mhm.
Starbucks, that sounds like it's community engagement,
Yeah.
but maybe not robust enough. Does a monthly office hour at Starbucks qualify by the EdNC standard as community engagement, or would I need to do something more robust?
I mean, I think that certainly could be community engagement. It really just depends on your own audience that you serve. Obviously, for a statewide audience, we would if we wanted to do something like that, we would have to do it a lot of times, but for a local, maybe a city paper, um, that certainly counts, giving your time and your space to meet with community members directly, maybe understanding that it doesn't always lead to a story in that moment, but just building that trust is the key thing and making sure that you are accessible. Those are the 2 things that are really important to keep in mind, so I would say that definitely counts.
Sure, but is it enough? It sounds like EdNC's vision of community engagement is bigger and bolder than the average outlets. Sometimes what I sense or see from you all is in the heroic category. What's the uh, community engagement at 100? What does that look like?
I think the vehicle in which you get to it matters less than what the end result is. So what I would say is if you are taking people's time and perhaps meeting with them or having an office hour, like you said, once a month, the question is then what are you doing with that information? Are you writing a story based off of it? Are you following up? Are you then, if you follow up and write a story, are you going back to that person and saying, hey, you told me you had this question. I took the time to answer and publish an article about it. It's really, are you completing that engagement loop that I think and kind of is what the measure is should be or sorry, is what the kind of measure of is it bold enough is are you actually doing anything with it? Because it's easy to, sit and say you're listening to people, but what are you doing with it once you've listened to them and you're trying to build that trust?
I like that, the engagement loop. Because otherwise the reporters and the community members feel like it's a waste of time if there's no end result.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's take a second to talk about you personally, professionally, if you don't mind. How did you find EdNC? How did EdNC find you? And what attracted you to the organization?
Absolutely, I'm happy to talk about this. So, I've been at EdNC now full time for 4 years. Next month is my anniversary. And I found them when I was an undergraduate student in the journalism school at UNC Chapel Hill. It was my junior year. I was the city editor on my school paper, and that was the year where the 2020 presidential election was coming up, and so we were trying to talk about, what we wanted to do for our election coverage, and I came into it knowing that I wanted to have a more engagement-focused, citizen agenda, if you will, kinda style to it. And my newspaper advisor connected me with someone on EdNC's team, Nation Han, who was a founding member of EdNC, and just recently, left the team, but has been instrumental in developing us. She connected me with him to kind of pick his brain about how to do this because I had no idea what I was doing. Because at the time that wasn't a huge focus still in my journalism curriculum. And so I really just had a chance to sit down with him at coffee and learn, and I loved doing it so much. We ended up having a student town hall where we asked people what issues they cared about with the election and things like that, and that really went on to guide our coverage, and I just really fell in love with it, and so when I was looking for a summer internship, I reached back out to him and asked if they happened to be hiring anybody, and so, that was the summer 2020 where the we had the first it was I think I reached out to him before the pandemic hit, so obviously that was changed everything, but I was able to, intern with them for a summer and cover just how schools were adapting in this time, and just really fell in love with EdNC's ethos of engagement, um, and decided that that was what I wanted to do, and so when I was graduating, I reached back out and asked if they were hiring and got lucky, and here I am. So it has been a real pleasure to be a part of the team and to work for a place that I think really shows a lot of positives of what journalism can be, especially in the education space.
That's a great story. I love hearing that. I have a very positive vibe about Ed and C, and yet if someone asked me to put my finger on it, a story or an approach that really distinguished the outlet, I'm not sure that I could. I think I'd tell people about the going to every county thing, which I've heard about before. We ran a piece about Ed and C not too long ago. So I'm sort of a fanboy from afar. What do you tell people, or what do people know if they know about EdNC? What's the calling card or the viral moment or the signature thing that people would associate EdNC with so far?
Yeah, I think there's if you ask about viral versus kind of calling card, those might be 2 different answers. I think what makes NNC special is our ability to go deep. We definitely benefit from being a nonprofit and having foundation funding that helps us, we can kind of plan years in advance, and don't necessarily have to worry about playing the advertising game as some outlets have to. And so we really have the ability and the funding and the space to go deep on issues. I believe it was 2 years ago now. We had just been in our time in the last, previous years of working at NNC, we had been kind of hearing one-off things about the role of community colleges, in North Carolina. North Carolina has an attainment goal where we wanna have a certain number of North Carolinians with a degree or credential by 2030, and community colleges are playing a huge role in that, but nobody was really talking about how, why, and what could be done to help them even more. And so we leveraged our entire team to visit all 58 community colleges in North Carolina in the span of a few months to conduct really in-depth research on the role community colleges play in workforce development, in providing childcare, and being employment engines in their local communities, and did a whole bunch of research and wrote articles about all 58 community colleges. And that ended up kind of framing the argument for them going forward, and how they wanted to advocate for themselves. And so just the ability to leverage a team and dedicate time to travel and go deep on subjects that people might, on the surface not find as interesting in a more traditional newsroom,
Mhm.
we really have the ability to dedicate time and resources to do that and kind of serve as a voice for those things on the state level.
It sounds valuable. It also sounds exhausting. When I
Not if you love the work.
when I hear you talk about EdNC, I think a lot about open campus. I don't know if you know the open campus folks or the open campus approach. For folks who might know open campus, where does EdNC fit in with the open campus ideas? Are they in the office next door, or are they doing something very different from what NC does? It just sounds similar to me.
I can't say I'm super familiar with, any of the people, at least at Open Campus. Um, I will say I don't think we don't really we obviously look to people across the country and state who are doing things in journalism or not even necessarily within journalism specifically, it's so we can learn from. But I will say we are guided by our audience and by the people who need us. Um, we don't necessarily pick one model and stick with it. We really try to be flexible year to year and we look at what our priorities are internally, what are the priorities externally, how can we manage our team to meet those things and do our best work.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's really what guides us, I would say, like, every year
Yeah.
as part of our annual review process, budget process, all of these things, we talk to people both in the community and within our team about what they think the most important stories are, and just try to go based off of those kinds of things, not necessarily sticking to one model all the time without necessarily being adaptive.
Huh. That's so interesting. So much of what happens in journalism is based on people finding and joining others who are doing a certain kind of a model or a certain kind of approach. Um, this is the first time that I'm hearing about. It's probably not the first time it's ever happened, but it's certainly the first time I'm hearing about an outlet that is really sort of reader or community focused. What does that look like in practice? Can you give me an example during the time that you've bid with an EdNC or before that you've heard about where the community said we need X and not Y, and Ed and C evolved or adapted? You mentioned the community college idea. Um, is there anything else where Ed and C sort of that illustrates this idea of finding community need and interest rather than picking a policy and then doing it sort of top down?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest example and one that is ongoing, when I first joined EdNC 4 years ago, we were kind of embarking on this. We called it the 100 County Project. As
Right.
I mentioned, we've always prioritized traveling, but we really, after, this was like 6 or 7 years into EdNC, we decided we really needed to have some sort of formal framework to keep track of all the things that we were learning. And so we did a survey of all of our audience across counties to see where they got their news, what they find trustworthy, what they care about, and took that information to do um, dedicated distribution guides county by county. So, for example, if there was a place in rural North Carolina where maybe there isn't a local newspaper anymore, but people there primarily get their news from Facebook, we would say, oh, we should make sure that we run targeted Facebook ads in that county for articles they say they care about to make sure that we can get it to them. Or if there's a certain trusted community member, having them be an EdNC brand ambassador, kind of share out our content locally and things like that. So that's more on the distribution kind of side of our model. But then almost every day or week, we are getting feedback from our readers about what questions they have and what things they care about that they maybe aren't seeing enough coverage about. And we will that informs our assignments week in and week out,
So
in terms of the news that we're covering.
and just to make it concrete, what's an example of a thing that you heard about that, you, turned the organization's attention to that wasn't on your list necessarily, but proved to be a successful and important,
Yeah.
coverage area?
Yeah, this might seem like a small thing, but it ended up being really huge in the end. So this was maybe 2 years ago. Um, in North Carolina, we do our budget process. It's a biennium budget process. So they meet on odd years to set the budget for the next 2 years. That's super wonky. I'll just move on past that. But basically, they were meeting in 2023 to set the budget, and there was essentially an error in the text that they had written and approved that would drastically change how principals were paid in North Carolina and essentially lower their pay. And one of these principals that's our source pointed this out to one of our reporters, and he ended up writing an article about this, highlighting it, and that ended up getting it fixed. And that is that's a small demographic of people. There's only 2,500 principals in North Carolina, but obviously that's something that matters to those people. And it's something that we are in a very good position to elevate and bring to people's attention because nobody wrote about that at the time. But our article highlighting that ended up getting it fixed in the final budget and restoring their pay to how it was supposed to be in the original term. And so that just is that's one example to me that really shows how, having the source relationships and building trust with people where they feel comfortable just calling up a reporter and saying, "Hey, I noticed this error," and knowing that we're gonna do something with it really kind of goes back to the engagement loop and why that's so important.
It sounds like a great example, but it also reminds me of this issue of trade journals and readership. Um, Trade education news outlets, understandably, end up being very well sourced with educators, administrators, policymakers, academics, and sometimes it has felt to me, at least, like there's a sort of a captive audience kind of situation there, and the trade journal ends up focused on adult system educator needs as opposed to parent, student, community needs. Is there an example? And if there isn't off the top of your head, we can come back and add it later. But if there was an example that's resembled the one you just described, but involved community as opposed to system representative or member, um, that's the kind of journalism that I'm always looking for and hoping for. Because frankly, the administrators and the teachers and the legislative people all have jobs that allow them to or encourage them to make their experiences known in the system, in the journalistic system. Are there things where EdNC has surfaced a parent or community or student issue, and where EdNC has been able to jump in?
Oh, absolutely. And I will also point out that, those interests aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, especially speaking for our audience in North Carolina. Even if they have different ideas, everybody wants what's best for either their kid or the kids in their community or in their school. And that might manifest differently, but I will say those are not necessarily always mutually exclusive. Um, there's two examples that come to mind. I'll start off with maybe a slightly like a smaller lift one. We had a very similar scenario as what I just described with the principal pay last year. North Carolina just went through an expansion of our private school voucher program called Opportunity Scholarships. They removed income requirements and a couple other previous requirements for the program that opened it up to anybody in the state. And there was a lot of interest in it. And we had a lot of input from parents who were applying for these vouchers who had a lot of questions that they couldn't find answers to online or by the representative. And so we spent a lot of time doing what we call them ask and answers, where we literally take people's questions and answer them. And so we did several guides on kind of walking people through the process to help them get the information they need about how to apply, what to know, and things like that. So that's kind of one small example, but um, a larger example that I think is more of a kind of community event type example. Back in the 2020 race for state superintendent, we had a huge field of candidates at the time. I think there were like 7 or 8. And so we noticed in that kind of just exactly what you said, like students issues directly from students were not necessarily always being elevated. And so someone on our team worked to coordinate her name was Allie Lindenberg, I should give her a shout out, worked to have a student town hall where we brought those candidates in and gave space for students to ask them questions directly and see where they stood on issues that matter directly to them. And then, of course, we ended up writing about what the issues that they surfaced and doing all of our other coverage, highly documenting how the candidates stood on those different issues, but really giving students a platform. We got out of the way. We just obviously moderated the event, but we let them directly ask superintendents questions. Um, and so that's just, those are a couple examples that come to mind.
Those,
Um,
those are
yeah,
great examples. Thank you. I talked a year or two ago to a great education editor named Ruth Servin Smith. Do you know Ruth? She's at
I
the
do not.
Alabama Ed Lab. And she said that one of the challenges, and I'm paraphrasing here, so apologies to Ruth. She said that one of the challenges was directing journalists towards stories that the community was interested in, rather than stories that the reporter was interested in. And I'm curious how, and again, those aren't always different, but reporters, as a former reporter myself, I can say we get ideas in our heads. We think we've found something really interesting. Does that issue ever come up at EdNC, either in terms of who you hire or how you pick and assign stories where there's a very strong reporter interest?
Yeah, I will say I think we're very lucky at EdNC to have a lot of space to give our reporters time to do work that they think is important. I will say what we often try to do is it might help for me to back up a bit and kind of explain our structure in terms of how we do our weeks. On Mondays, we do all of our organizational meetings kind of in one go with the idea that people can then take their Tuesday through Friday and be out in community and reporting and all of those things. And so each content team has a meeting with their editor and the other reporters on their team. We segment it by early childhood, K-12, and post-secondary. And that's really a space for people to talk about what they're working on and for people like me or their immediate editor to ask, well, who's the audience for this?
Mm.
How are you going to get this people who need to read it? Like, what are we thinking about here before they sit down and start writing or doing the reporting to have that in the back of their mind? Because there might seem to be an issue that a reporter cares about that maybe is a little wonky, like policy wonky, or maybe a little more narrow. And then it's my job and their editor's job to work with them to talk about how can we broaden this? Is there an angle here that might um, make this a little bit more, reach a broader audience. And so we obviously try to give our reporters a lot of space to work about what they care about. And then it's on me and other people on our team to make sure that it's packaged in the best way and can reach the broadest audience possible.
I should have asked this at the outset, and maybe you said it and I missed it, but how big are you now? Are we talking about 3 or 4 reporters per team or 1 or 2 reporters per team?
Yeah, we have 12 people full-time on our staff now, and that's I think about 10 reporters total. And so yeah, we have about 2 or 3 on each team, covering the different areas. And we have, specific beats within all of that. We have an attainment person who covers attainment. We have people who cover rural schools specifically, and arts and things like that. So, we try to go broad.
I talked to a journalist in California not too long ago who'd gotten involved in a project, a very community oriented project that was sort of connected to the NPR model called Curious City. Community members ask questions about the city that they're interested in, and then journalists go out and get the answers. And this sounds very much like uh, some of what you all are doing. And the journalist, that I was talking to said that it was, amazingly difficult work, to do, that it felt like it was sometimes replicating what the district or the system should have been doing, informing the public, um, and that it was both, not as, glamorous as, anyone might want who was an ambitious journalist who went to J school and wanted to make a big impact of the world, but it also wasn't particularly well read. That people said they wanted something answered, but then when it came time to read it, the audience wasn't there. Have you all encountered any of this dynamic either on the journalist side, "Ugh, I don't want to do this," or on the reader side, actually, I don't want to know what the pickup schedule is for next year. Have you encountered any of these challenges that were described to me?
I won't say that I've had any personal experience with this on the team. Um, I will say we put a lot of thought into the ask and answer articles that we do. And usually often I would say we get to get multiple questions about something before we really just sit down and do an article about it. But the thought is that this is kind of, if you are familiar with the engagement funnel where, the top is kind of one-time readers who come to your website and at the very bottom might be donors or subscribers or things like that. We view these articles as a way to get people in the door. Maybe they're not as familiar with EdNC, they just came across an article and had a question. It might end up helping people who are more loyal readers, but that's kind of our thought is it's a top line article because obviously reading an ask and answer about how much our teachers paid is very different than sitting down to read a 2,000 word article about the budget or something like that. So we view these as articles to get people in the door, and we see very good readership on them. Obviously, that plays a lot into what the distribution tactics are for that article, but we did one a couple years back just about why do students take so many standardized tests, I think was the question that we got. And so we broke down all the different tests students take in North Carolina and what they do and all of those things. And that pops up still to this day as an article that people are reading. Um, and so I will say it definitely comes back to being really in tune with your audience and the engagement loop. Sorry to keep saying it, but just are you going back to the same people who asked the question and are they finding it valuable? I will, we wouldn't exist without our readers. EdNC started with 0 readers literally in 2015, and now we have over 1 million. We've had over 1 million users for the past 4 years in a row. And we wouldn't be able to do the work we do without people coming to us. And it's on us as journalists and as reporters to be going to them and serving their needs in the way that best suits them.
Right. I love the way you talk about the I mean, congratulations on the success, and I also love the way EdNC people talk about the obligation to readers. It doesn't sound just like lip service, it sounds like something that's actually operationalized, and is a big challenge for journalism, writ large. I've got a couple more questions, but thank you so much already for doing this. The any organization as it goes along, especially in the world in which we're in, has to adapt, learn some hard lessons. We thought we were going to fly planes, but trains turn out to be better than planes. Are there any major shifts that EdNC has had to make uh, from the original conception or from 5 years ago or 4 years ago when you were arriving that it might be helpful for other people to learn the lessons that you learned?
Absolutely. I will say I think the biggest thing we've learned across our 10 years now is knowing when to stop doing things. Like, if somebody has a great idea and it does sound great and is something we wanna do, but either we just logistically don't have the team time to put into it, maybe we don't have the funds or something. And so knowing when to stop doing things is really, really important, and we did struggle with that for the first few years that we existed. And so in around, I think, 2020, we sat down and had a person on our team who created what we call the playbook for NC. And so they literally just made a huge spreadsheet, um, laying out all the things we do literally to make EdNC work,
Yeah.
across website, audience, like operations, everything. Um, and every year, people on our leadership team sit down with our editor in chief, and we go through it and we say, what are we still doing? What is not working anymore? What can we stop doing? Like, we just go through. And at this point, now that we've been doing it for a few years, it's definitely not a huge it's not like killing your darlings or anything like that at this point. Like, we all understand that we need to sometimes stop doing things in order to do all the things that really do work and bring people on our team fulfillment. And so operationalizing that and learning how to kind of build that muscle was definitely a challenge, that I would recommend. We talk a lot more about that in our annual report from this past year, which I'm happy to share with you afterward if that would be helpful. But yeah,
I've heard that this is a major challenge, especially if you want to do new things, you have to not do other things.
yeah.
Can you give an example of a thing that you did, you the organization did, that you decided to stop doing, even if it had been successful for a time?
Oh, yeah, I might have to go back and look at it to find an exact example off the top of my head. Because, like I said, it's so just, we go you sit down and we go through it and move on pretty quickly from it, so I'm trying to think of
Was there
a good
anything?
example.
Was there anything that you found particularly difficult to stop doing that you're now past and
Yeah.
glad you're not doing anymore?
I will say there's one thing that it's kind of on pause now, we're trying to see we might look at a way to, improve it a bit, but, we were actually I think it was we were inspired by the 74 originally. I think they were the ones who inspired us, to have, all articles have share buttons at the top. You could email it or tweet it or sorry, post it on X or anything like that. But we were inspired by how they had automatic things on the side of the articles that had share text with the article as well. So you could kind of maybe pull out a quote for somebody or something if there was something you wanted them to highlight on social media. And we thought that was super cool. And so we worked really hard to build the code into our website and had all of our reporters doing that every article, and I think it probably got used 5 times maybe in the time that we were doing it over the course of the year. And so we just decided one day, like, we're just gonna stop. We're not gonna make our reporters do this anymore. Like, if they feel inclined to do it, we'll let them. We'll keep the feature, but we're not gonna require it anymore just because we weren't seeing the payoff from it. And obviously that was a little disappointing given the time it took to set it up, but it wasn't paying off, and so we didn't think it was super important to keep taking up people's time and continuing it.
That's a great example. I've read a few articles about this, and it is a big challenge. On the content side, and I think this is going to be my last question for now. Thank you again. On the content side, especially in the current environment, education news outlets and education journalists are struggling to figure out how much to get involved in school culture wars coverage, political coverage, coverage related to the current administration's education initiatives. Some are going all in, um, uh, or going in as in a heavy way, and others are staying away. Where is EdNC? How did you decide? How have you decided how much or how little to cover education politics 2025?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say this is certainly evolving for us. We have, like I mentioned, we have these weekly meetings with our content team and we talk exactly about this kind of question, kind of seeing how things are going week to week. Um, but I will say it's definitely something our audience is interested in. We follow our audience and um we really prioritize, the fact that we can go deeper and spend time with these issues. And so we try to prioritize doing just the facts articles about what these policies being proposed do and what they would mean, and kind of staying focused on that lens. And so we've noticed a lot of appreciation from our audience for that because a lot of, articles that we were seeing weren't even necessarily linking to, the original executive orders and things like that. And we had a lot of people coming to us just like, I want to find the things so I can read it myself. And so just kind of, you know, we don't want to inundate people, but making sure that people who read us are informed about the changes that are being proposed, at a surface level is kind of one of the priorities. And then, as always, we're going to be talking to people who are in schools or have kids in schools or however they're related to however they come to education. We want to talk to them about what they care about and what questions they have and have that be the primary thing that guides our coverage.
And would it be you or someone else who sort of kept tabs on the overall mix of political versus nuts and bolts coverage?
Yeah, I would say it's primarily, me and our editor in chief who sit down and, I'm the one who I work with all the teams and makes the content schedule for the week or the day or however the news cycle is. And so we sit down and, we try to make sure that we have a balance of kind of these news articles about either politics or policies being proposed at the state or local level, and also, feature articles about what our reporters are finding as they actually are traveling and what they're surfacing in schools and community colleges and other education spaces throughout the state. So we try to make sure we have a balance of those things for sure.
So interesting. Um, uh, uh, Thank you so much for your time. I think EdNC is a really interesting and distinctive, in some ways, education outlet out there, and I think there are a lot of lessons for the rest of education journalism to learn about. And the grade is all about education journalists learning from each other. It's been a great pleasure. This is Anna Pogarcic from EdNC. Anna, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was fun.